See, this may seem like a small detail, but the benefits of this indicator are big. Now that you have got your students thinking about what the lesson will cover and what they will be expected to know and do, how do you get them interested in it? You use a hook. All teachers stimulate interest in the topic. Let's take a look at how these teachers hook their students to stimulate their interest and focus them on what they will learn.
I like to start off the day with a little bit of a hook, something to sort of grab students' attention, something that will leave them with a question that they know we're about to answer. I liked the cartoon because specifically to today's lesson, it really left the kids maybe with a question of, if it's so dangerous to explore, then why do we do it? And I want them really going, okay, well then why do we? And I want to be the one to answer a question they have. So I'm almost using the cartoon or sometimes a quote or a document to sort of have them ask me a question that they might normally not have asked me if I just said, so what kind of questions do you have about exploring?
How many of you ran away when you were a little kid? Ran down the street? How far did you go?
Around the corner.
Around the corner. What did you bring with you? Did you bring nothing? Was that smart? That's why you were back in 5 minutes, because you were hungry, probably, right?
Have you thought of using a hook like a cartoon or a document? What are some other ideas? Let's keep the action rolling.
I'm going to introduce you to a man. His name is Mr. Escher, M.C. Escher. And I love Mr. Escher's work. He used a lot of math in his art. All right, so I found a couple of his pictures last night. I'm going to save my favorite one for last. And we're going to look at the kind of math that he uses in his artwork. So look at this picture here. What kind of geometric shapes do you see within this picture? Monet?
I see a cube.
You see a cube within this picture?
Yes.
So right here, if I were to highlight it,
Yeah.
you'd see a cube. Thumbs up if you'd see the cube within his picture.
Did you notice that her students seemed surprised when she presented them with an art lesson during math? Another teacher demonstrates her unique approach.
I think poetry is really good for the younger kids. I use poetry a lot. Every time we go and do a new word study or something like that, I'm always trying to find a poem because they love rhyming. So it's something they can remember, and the poem is just a good way for them to be able to pick words out. It's short enough, it's usually fun, and they can remember it. So I like to use poetry in all areas.
Art, poetry, games, cartoons, documents. There are so many options to pique your students' interest and focus them on what you're about to present. Now for some theory. Here, a few teachers share why they take the time to hook their students. Let's take a look.
Well, I think it's really important to be able to relate to my kids. I heard a speaker say one time that you can teach anyone anything as long as you have their attention. And one way that I try and grab my students' attention is by bringing something into my content that's relevant to them in a way that they can relate to it, that they feel like they're a part of it, so that when I introduce the concept, I have their attention. That's the challenge for me as the math teacher is how do I break my students from what they may have heard their whole lives about themselves, or what they have maybe even heard from their parents, that you are not a math person. And when math is put in that context, it doesn't make sense. It makes it seem like something that's far out. So the challenge for me as a teacher is how can I put this into a setting that is captivating to the kids? Even if the mathematics itself isn't exhilarating, how can I make it interesting so that I'll at least have their attention, so that they'll recognize that, oh, if this actually does relate to something that I know of, that I'm familiar with, well, then maybe it's something that I can understand. I think it's a huge confidence builder, even if they, can do something like recognize a place around town before we go into some mathematical concept that they've never seen before.
Where was he when I was learning math? And finally, as we introduce new material to our students, we should also use modeling, demonstrations, and graphics to convey what we expect them to know and do, as our next indicator explains. All teachers use modeling, demonstration, and graphics. Let's peek in on a teacher using modeling in her classroom to introduce new material and to manage behavior.
I found that the more that I model with the students, the more successful they are when they try it on their own. In writing workshop, we just do it step by step, and so day one will be brainstorming, and then they go to their seat and try to brainstorm on their animal. The next day I'll model taking that brainstorm, doing a first draft, and then they then go to their seats and try to create a first draft using the brainstorm, and then it might be rearranging sentences. They then go to their seats and see if any sentences need to be rearranged, if they have to cut apart their first draft and tape it back together and things like that. So it's just a lot of modeling it to the class, and we do it together. It's not just me doing it on my own, but it's doing it as a group. And then they go to their seats and give it a try. After doing it as a group, I feel that students are more confident in doing it on their own. A lot of things are modeled for them in a mini lesson prior, I guess, at the beginning of the lesson, and then they'll then go and give it a try at their seats. Another thing that is modeled is things like finding books that are just right. And so we take a look at text that is really easy, texts that are just right, and texts that are very hard. And one thing that actually another teacher showed me was using T-shirts. And so we have students, one student come up, wear a T-shirt that's way too small, a T-shirt that's just right, and a T-shirt that's too big. And we talk about how when we dress ourselves, it's very important to wear the size that is just right for us. And then we go into books and talk about what we can do to find a just right book using 5-finger rule, where every time we come across a word that is difficult, we put a finger down. And if we're left with no fingers at the end of a page, the book is too hard for us. And so it's just a lot of modeling, and then releasing it to the students to try independently, and then regrouping at the end of the lesson to discuss, I guess, how it went, questions that they still have.
And the benefits of this practice in teacher-directed instruction continue.
I always model for my students. I, in particular, teach a cluster classroom with gifted children as well as LEP children. So I have a variety of learning styles in my classroom. Children who work at an advanced level and children who come to me speaking almost no English at all. So for those children who speak almost no English, for me to explain the directions would do almost no good. So for me to model the lesson, to show them what I want them to do, they would have a much greater concept and get much more out of the directions, much more out of the lesson that way. So I always model.
Modeling communicates your expectations and sets students up to meet those expectations. Let's not forget that this indicator also directs us to use graphics. We're all familiar with graphic organizers, visual representations of knowledge, concepts, or ideas. Graphic organizers can help spark interest, clarify information, and assist students in organizing their thoughts and their learning. Let's take a look at several teachers putting graphics to action in their classrooms.
Graphic organizers are really important because it helps them to put the information in a specific spot. They can use it to kind of put their ideas down so they're not kind of all over the place. Especially for journaling, we use a circle map, and then later on, once they get familiar with that, we'll use a bubble map. And that really helps them focus on the topic so they're not writing. It isn't kind of going all over the place. They know the topic and they know the things exactly they want to write about in their journal, so it helps them form sentences. And the Venn diagram helps a lot in the content area, science and social studies. I use it a lot for them because the information in those areas can kind of be confusing for them, so the Venn diagram kind of separates. For instance, we were doing the maps and globes today. It helped them separate the difference between the two and then also see the similarities as well.
Well, first of all, vocabulary. I always like to incorporate the vocabulary because with science, the vocabulary is usually difficult for students. And I try to stick away from the normal define the words and, give me just spit back a definition, because a lot of the times the kids really don't have an understanding of what they just copied in the back of a book. So I try to incorporate the vocabulary words with some type of graphic so that they're not only understanding it, but they're also visually seeing it, and they're also making connections at the same time.